Good morning, good afternoon, folks. We're going to let everybody join here for a minute, and then we'll get started. So just 1 minute, and we'll get going. All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. We have a lot to cover, and we only have an hour to do it. So we're just going to dive in. And first and foremost, welcome. I want to welcome everybody to to our webinar for environmental collaboration and conflict resolution in support of federal climate initiatives. And this is a presentation to present the results and outcomes of an assessment report that we have done with the same name. We appreciate everybody for joining today and for your time and interest. It's an important topic, and it needs attention from our federal partners and the environmental collaboration and conflict resolution community. So we're happy you're joining. My name is Brian Manwaring. I'm the director of the National Center for Environmental Conflict Resolution. I'm in Tucson, Arizona. And I just wanted to provide a couple opening words to kick off the webinar and introduce the foundation itself. So in the next slide, Courtney. So just to provide a little background about the foundation and the National Center. So the National Center is a program in the Morris K. Udall and Stewart L. Udall Foundation. We're headquartered here in Tucson. The foundation itself is a small independent agency in the executive branch established by Congress in '92. And our broad mission is to promote leadership, education, collaboration, and conflict resolution in the areas of the environment, public lands, and natural resources, and also to support the development of self-governance to strengthen Native nations. So we have several programs. You can check those out on our website. We're going to focus here on the National Center. And next slide, the National Center's primary focus is providing collaborative support to federal agencies, tribes, and their partners through mediation, facilitation, conflict assessment, and training services. And if you look at our next slide, you'll see more of our services and how we work and what we do. And typically they're project services and training. And I'll talk a little bit about training at the end of this course. But one of our roles is to also build collaborative capacity throughout the federal government through the development of resources, conducting research and outreach, and other activities. And in that spirit, we decided to take a closer look at the application of collaboration and conflict resolution as they apply to climate issues in the federal government. So led by Marcelle DuPraw, who you'll hear from in a minute, we conducted an assessment of the application and we'll start using ECCR, environmental collaboration and conflict resolution, to issues relating to the climate. In August of last year, we released the assessment report, which is available to download off of our website. Talk a little bit about that later too. And so we're hosting the webinar today. This is our second webinar actually to present the findings of that report. So the purpose of the report was really to summarize the issues and challenges facing agencies on climate initiatives, and to identify collaborative tools and approaches that can be applied to those challenges. So certainly ECCR here has a lot of utility when we're thinking about these broad, extensive, multi-jurisdictional issues. So we feel that this is timely and hopefully helpful for our federal colleagues and our colleagues in the ECCR community. So with that, I'm joined by two National Center colleagues. So we have Marcelle DuPraw, who's a Senior Program Manager, and Courtney Owens, a Senior Program Associate. I want to thank them for all of their support on this. And for now, I'm going to turn it over to Courtney to do a little more introduction. Also, before we do that too, I just want to say we are recording this session, so just FYI on that. And with that, Courtney, over to you.
Thanks, Brian. So I'm sure you all have been going to a lot of Zoom webinars, but just as a reminder, we're going to be using a lot of the chat box at the bottom and also the Q&A box. When using the chat box, please make sure that you have selected all panelists and attendees if you want your message to be seen by other attendees. For the Q&A function, you may type a question into the Q&A box, and we'll do our best to answer throughout the webinar and during the dedicated Q&A session at the end of the webinar. We have a lot to cover today, so please be sure to put in your questions into the question box. If you see someone else has asked a question that interests you, you can upvote that question by clicking the thumbs up icon. So our agenda today is we've done the welcoming remarks, and then Marcy DuPraw will talk about the key report takeaways. We'll also have a Q&A after that section. We'll then talk about collaborating on climate challenges, success stories, and discussion, where there will also be a Q&A. And then lastly, we'll end with some closing remarks. So out of the 126 participants registered today, out of the 126, 63% of you are federal employees and 37 of you are non-federal employees, ranging from organizations and the most coming from universities and colleges. At this time, if you could take a moment to use the chat box to share your name, agency, or affiliation so we can get to know each other a little bit better. And with that, I'll hand it over to my colleague, Marcy DuPraw.
Excellent. Thank you, Courtney. Appreciate that. Greetings, everybody. We have so much to talk about. I know our challenge is going to be having more to talk about than time allows, but we're trying to do this concisely so that you can just jump on and get the highlights and over your lunch hour. I've asked Courtney to give me a heads up 5 minutes before my allotted time, so I can make sure that I get the key points across to you. So a little bit of information about the approach we took on this report, but before I even talk about the approach, a little context. So just to anchor us in the policy goal, the administration is trying to do its best to help the world from stop short of the 1.5 degrees Celsius global temperature rise compared to pre-industrial conditions. And we've already seen a 1.1 degree rise. Scientists say we need to cut global emissions by half by 2030. And of course, that's a huge challenge. And so we need all the help we can get. So our thought is that environmental collaboration and conflict resolution can be a significant help in getting traction on federal climate related initiatives. And we wanted to look into that and explore that assumption, see if we could get past an assumption and really dig into what our seasoned federal colleagues working on climate issues thought about that. And so we gathered their insights in this way. We did a series of interviews with 22 senior federal employees working in the climate arena. They came from 16 different departments, agencies, or bureaus. We asked them a series of 11 questions, and there were themes in the questions. We were trying to get to 3 themes, basically. What constraints or barriers does your agency face in terms of doing climate resiliency work or climate-related work? As your agency works on those initiatives, are you aware of related conflicts or complex challenges that are difficult for your agency to address by itself? And do you see ways that facilitators or mediators could help your agency in those initiatives? We started the interviews under the previous administration and concluded them under the current administration. So that's kind of an important piece, that they did span 2 administrations. Let's see, why don't we go ahead and take the next slide. So moving into the highlights of the report, I'm going to talk first about the obstacles that our interviewees named. And we searched the voluminous data that they provided us for themes. So if we could get the next slide, I'm just going to name the 5 themes and say a little about each one. So the first one, the primary issue at the time of the interviews was funding. And of course, that's driven by the administration's priorities and congressional priorities. And things have changed a lot from one administration to another in that picture. But an interesting thing to note is that there was a sub-theme that interviewees said that it wasn't just the amount of funding that was an issue, but the change every 4 to 8 years when the administration turns over, just the having to get used to and accommodate and adapt to a new set of priorities and changes in funding, just that transaction challenge was a significant setback in progress and momentum in these initiatives. So, of course, we want to look at whether there are things that we can do to streamline the adjustments that federal staff have to make when there's a change of administration, things to expedite the learning curve and institutionalize core activities. But a couple of points about that I wanted to just note was that the funding need is of such a large magnitude that it has to come from both the public and private sector, and that it's tough for under-resourced communities to access grants, even when the money's available, to locate those opportunities, to apply for them, to secure them. So that's a key piece to be cognizant of. The second challenge, workforce development. It's a matter of both the size of the workforce and the skill set, given the intensifying work around climate change and climate resilience. So equipping, building up the workforce capacity. The third one, interagency coordination and collaboration. Well, of course, climate change work is multi-jurisdictional in nature. And in the federal sector, we have agencies working across with different missions, different priorities, different procedures, different planning horizons, approaches, language, data sets, technical backgrounds. It's a lot of words, but it's also a lot of differences. And those are real differences that complicate the good efforts of our federal colleagues to get traction on these climate initiatives. The fourth challenge, collaboration with affected parties. Multi-party collaboration has been shown to be key to the success of complex public policy challenges. Some of the things that multi-party collaboration can do, but are nevertheless challenging, are helping parties understand climate change vulnerabilities, explore options for reinforcing the vulnerabilities, for remedying them, surfacing opportunities to work with other partners, syncing up priorities and plans. But the number of parties, the level of controversy, and the terminology involved are all challenges associated with working in multi-party collaboration. In addition, think about all the tribes that federally recognized tribes, 574 federally recognized tribes, and each one is unique and needs to be worked with as a unique sovereign entity. Some of the policy issues that came up that would be helpful to work in collaboration with affected parties across the board include cultural resource protection, fire, catastrophic fire exacerbated by climate change, sea level rise, and taking stock of vulnerabilities in a particular locale. The fifth challenge or obstacle to progress is the scale at which information needs to be disseminated to the public. And the concept there is to create a broad basic understanding in the public of sort of a muscle memory for us to work together on addressing our climate change challenges. So that entails making the public aware of existing information, because there is a lot of existing information, but getting it out as broadly as it needs to go, making the public aware of resources that are available, tailoring the data that is available for local and regional application. Limiting factors for information dissemination are the scale that is needed, and also the staff and networks to do the information dissemination. Next slide, please. So ways that our interviewees thought that environmental collaboration and conflict resolution could help support their federal climate initiatives. Next slide. Let me just briefly name again 5 key ways that our interviewees thought ECCR could be of help, and then I have a slide on each one to elaborate on what we mean by them. So the 5 main methods or approaches that people named were to facilitate and mediate interagency collaboration. And I'm distinguishing that from the second one, which is to design, facilitate, and mediate collaborative multi-party dialogue. So the first one refers to interagency collaboration within the federal family, so to speak, to get our act together to work effectively outside the federal government, or possibly within the public sector more broadly, different levels of governance, working to get in sync and then figuring out how best to work with private sector, NGOs, businesses, others outside the federal government. So those are two main methods. Third thing is doing effective tribal engagement to work with those 574 federally recognized tribes and others, non-federally recognized, state recognized. So there's much that ECCR practitioners can do to assist in that regard. Fourth is independent science and joint fact-finding. I'll say more about that shortly. And the fifth is collaborative capacity building to help everybody that I've been talking about have the skills and the systems and the procedures to work effectively together. Next slide. So now a slide on each one of those approaches to unbundle a little bit what we mean. So facilitating and mediating interagency collaboration. Again, remember how I mentioned that one of the obstacles to working well across the federal sector was the very different missions that different agencies have, the different terminology, the different procedures. So just getting the federal agencies in that are parties to a particular climate initiative together and organized and speaking effectively and clearly to one another, getting the federal players in sync is a serious undertaking in itself. So that could involve a facilitator or mediator convening the agencies, figuring out which agencies and who within each agency and what do they need in order to come together and make good use of the time. Establishing the processes by which the agencies will collaborate, facilitating their meetings, supporting their shared learning, so they develop a common vocabulary and a common understanding of the problem they're trying to solve. Documenting their progress, helping them identify best management practices, and then help plan how they want to engage other players outside of the federal government. Next slide. So what did we mean by design, facilitate, and mediate collaborative dialogue? Well, this one is the activities that are most central to the role of a facilitator or mediator in the environmental arena. They involve assessing a situation, a particular climate challenge, creating a collaborative environment, and facilitating a solution. The support typically focuses on helping affected parties reach a voluntary agreement on how to address a shared challenge. And that might be taking place at the site-specific level, like say sea level rise is washing out a particular highway that goes along a stretch of the coast. Well, a site-specific collaborative problem-solving process could address that. Or at the policy level, say a statewide climate plan, that would be a policy level challenge that a facilitator might assist parties in building consensus on. Sometimes, and most often, we think of facilitators and mediators helping with agreement-focused processes, but sometimes they just help federal agencies gather constructive input by managing public meetings or meetings with various groups of stakeholders without trying to build consensus, but getting that input to the federal agency decision maker in a way that the agency can make best use of. Either way, a facilitator or mediator brings impartiality and independence that are often very helpful in bridging across silos and getting people talking to each other in a way that they all understand what one another are trying to say. Next slide. So remember that the third ECCR approach that our interviewees named as a way that we facilitators and mediators could help was tribal engagement. And I would say, first off, that Native nations are critical partners in federal climate initiatives. as sovereign nations, and also because the federal government has a trust responsibility to do the right thing by Native nations. And facilitators and mediators can be of assistance in a variety of ways to help engage Native nations as sovereign entities when they express interest in the topics that are on the table. Can help people understand, the parties that are involved in a collaborative process understand the distinction between government to government consultation and collaborative engagement, because collaborative engagement isn't meant to replace government to government consultation, and sometimes people are fuzzy about that, but it's important for a practitioner to help all involved understand the distinction. A facilitator or mediator can help design a collaborative process in ways that are culturally responsive to the tribes involved. The facilitator or mediator can help make room for multiple ways of knowing indigenous, traditional ecological knowledge, as well as science, Western science, and help people hear each other. Next slide, please. The fourth big bucket, so to speak, in terms of approaches, ECCR approaches that our interviewees felt could be helpful, is called independent science and joint fact finding. And this type of support focuses on helping link a collaborative process with the underlying science that is so important in addressing, finding effective and durable solutions to environmental challenges. So the science itself, as I'm sure you are aware, may be contentious on its own. Various folks debating what sources are credible and so on, or maybe just complex. And a facilitator or a third party science neutral, who isn't necessarily a facilitator, but a scientist that all of the parties trust and find credible, or a science advisory panel can investigate scientific questions on behalf of a diverse group of collaborators. The facilitator working with those collaborators can also help in terms of assisting the collaborators in framing joint questions that will be addressed, and helping them design data collection methods that will answer those joint questions, ensure the data is credible and useful to all, explore implications of the data collected, identify priorities for filling the gaps in data, or for what to do with the data based on what the data says, what actions to take, and plan for external engagement to bring others into the picture. It can be a very powerful way of supporting a multi-party collaboration on climate-related challenges. Fifth, next slide, please. The fifth big bucket of ECCR assistance that our interviewees named was collaborative capacity building. They might not have used that term, but that encompasses what we often think of first off as training in negotiation, interest-based negotiation, in meeting management, in working effectively across cultural differences, but also coaching. Also collaborating on systems design, like if you have a stream of similar challenges. One example in the climate change arena is sea level rise forcing relocations along the coast, in Alaska in particular, where numerous communities are having to grapple with that. Well, are there systems that can be put in place to help deal with, each community has to tailor to their needs, but the federal agencies that are helping them have an established set of protocols for how to assist when it is clear that a community is going to have to relocate. So that would be the systems design type of assistance, where the ECCR practitioner works with affected parties to design the systems that will work for everybody for this similar set of challenges. Another thing that third-party practitioners, by that I mean facilitators and mediators, can do is help assess the collaborative capacity of an agency that's trying to build its muscles to work collaboratively on climate change issues. So assess the agency's collaborative capacity and make recommendations for how to strengthen it. Could have to do with changes to the organizational culture, systems, procedures, and so on. Next slide, please. So here we just want to bring to your attention the documented benefits of using environmental conflict resolution and collaboration. There is a report available at NEPA.gov that was produced by the Federal Forum on ECCR, a group across the federal sector that the Udall Foundation facilitates. And we help pool data about the use of environmental collaboration and conflict resolution. We've been doing that since 2006. And this report came out after 10 years of that to identify lessons learned. When that report came out in 2018, the federal executive branch, federal agencies had used ECCR for more than 4,200 documented ECCR cases. And this report can be very helpful to you in advocating for the use of ECCR when you're trying to make a pitch to affected parties, stakeholders, your management. This is a good resource to draw upon. It shows documented evidence for increased efficiency, better and more durable outcomes from collaborative problem solving, improved relationships and understanding, and increased capacity to serve the public as the federal agencies are charged with doing. Next slide, please. So now moving on to some specific strategies for carrying out the 5 approaches, ECCR approaches or methods that we just went over for tackling the 5 limiting factors or obstacles to getting traction on climate change initiatives that convened by the federal government. So I'd like to encourage you to listen to these ideas. Some came from the interviewees, some came from the Udall Foundation staff as we digested what we heard from the interviews. But please feel free to listen to these ideas, take them and run with them. If something you hear grabs your attention and sounds promising for a climate change challenge that you're dealing with, feel free to give me a call or email me, and I'm happy to kick around ideas with you about how that strategy might be applied in your situation. Next slide, please.
Marcy, just a heads up, a 5-minute warning.
Perfect. Okay, we're on time. All right. So for challenge number 1, the shifting priorities and funding, recall that the change of administration was identified as a challenge based on uncertain funding and new priorities. So these are some ways to help federal personnel quickly gain traction in implementing the administration's climate priorities. One is to build internal agreement on the agency's climate action plans, strengthening interagency relationships in the process, because agencies don't do their climate action plans in a vacuum. They need to get input from other agencies as well as they work on their own. Then a second idea is working with other federal agencies to identify funding gaps that are related to critical needs for collaborating on climate challenges and potential funding sources to fill those gaps. And I'm saying collaborate with other federal agencies to do that because that will enable agencies to pool resources and find ways of filling data needs that will benefit multiple agencies. Another idea is to convene a conference to share ways that ECCR has been used for climate initiatives. And one more idea is to convene interagency dialogue to understand the administration's climate directives and network on how best to implement them. Next slide. In terms of the challenge around workforce development, that involves a lot of needs around content, equipping the federal workforce to understand the forms that climate adaptation and resilience can take, and where to find data and vulnerabilities and how to tailor it to different audiences' needs. But it also involves collaboration skills, and ECCR can help on both of those two challenges, both the process needs for the workforce development to learn collaboration skills, and also the substantive needs to build the shared understanding about climate challenges. Some of the ideas that came up about ways to help the workforce in terms of beefing up the workforce to deal with, to collaborate on climate challenges are to assess the agency's collaborative capacity and identify collaboration skills, systems, approaches, and policies to strengthen that capacity, to institutionalize collaboration training. Of course, any collaboration training tends to be helpful, whether it's just sending one person that you supervise to get the training, or a group of people you supervise, or a group of people that are working together on a particular climate change initiative, getting the whole group training in collaboration. Jointly identifying and institutionalizing collaboration best practices, partnering with other federal agencies to build staff skills and knowledge, and again, convening interagency dialogue to help equip federal personnel across agencies on understanding and implementing the administration's climate directives. Next slide, please. For the third challenge, interagency coordination and collaboration, as you know, federal climate change initiatives require significant cross-agency coordination, especially around joint data collection and analysis. But our interviewees acknowledged that it can be burdensome, complex, inefficient, and said that it needed extra focus and funding to collaborate effectively across the federal government on climate initiatives. So some strategies that could help: identifying federal climate information needs that could benefit from joint action, connecting agencies to resources on interagency coordination and collaboration, things like case studies, training, facilitators and mediators, developing tailored materials. Third idea is to facilitate project-specific interagency collaborative problem solving. That's the classic facilitation mediation for climate challenges and conflicts. Fourth idea is to foster partnerships among federal, state, and local agencies, tribes, and intertribal associations. So that's the public sector getting itself in sync. And finally, facilitating development of interagency communication strategies, conflict resolution processes, and memoranda of understanding. So you're building the institutional arrangements that support interagency collaboration. Next slide, please. The fourth challenge being collaborating with affected parties. That's an ever-present need. Our interviewees confirmed, but the number of parties, the complexity of the issues, the scientific uncertainty involved makes it very, a challenge. So what forms of collaboration to use and how to organize it? Those are some of the questions that federal colleagues struggle with as they think, well, I'd like to collaborate with external parties on this climate challenge, but how do I get started? So strategies that might help, raise awareness about how to tell when a collaborative approach might be appropriate and how to access facilitators and mediators. The Udall Foundation, the National Center for Environmental Conflict Resolution, is front and center available to help you with these kinds of things, but a number of the other federal agencies also have in-house offices of environmental collaboration, conflict resolution that are excellent resources. A number of state agencies, state governments have state offices of dispute resolution, but across the board, whatever we can do to raise awareness about how to tell when a collaborative approach is appropriate and how to access help. Conduct situation assessments to identify key stakeholders and determine whether to collaborate, and if so, to design the collaboration approach. Facilitators and mediators in the environmental arena, that is what they do. They're ready. Convene and facilitate multi-stakeholder processes to jointly formulate solutions to climate-related challenges. That's what they do, facilitators and mediators. Building on situation assessments, then they manage those processes to help everybody find mutually acceptable agreements. Proactively explore options for collaborating on emerging issues, for example, climate change and environmental health. Facilitator can help explore the issue, flesh it out from different perspectives, and explore options for how it might be addressed. So that's like really getting out there on the leading edge of the climate challenges we've got. Connecting federal personnel to collaborative resources, again, case studies, facilitators, mediators, training, and enhancing government to government consultation and engagement. The Udall Foundation offers a training specifically in that, by the way. Next slide. And the final challenge, sharing information with the public. There's three components to that. As I mentioned, the scale at which this is needed, educating the public about the changes that they need to plan for and expect, how to minimize negative impacts, adaptation strategies that they could consider, so that the scale of education needed on those things. Big theme is tailoring available data to the local situation, and then understanding variations in how folks take in information and formatting the public education efforts accordingly. Third-party practitioners, facilitators, and mediators can help in several ways. They can facilitate focus groups to help federal agencies understand public perspectives and the needs of different types of affected parties. They can facilitate public meetings where agency personnel are making informational presentations and discussing climate change with the public. And they could help federal agencies assess public information and education needs and develop materials and approaches to address those needs, factoring in different ways of taking in information. Next slide. So we have a Q&A opportunity at this point, and I've asked Brian Manwaring, who opened the session, to kind of scan the chat screen, see if there are sort of themes in the chat screen that he could bring to my attention, or specific questions. Brian, what do you see there?
Yeah, so thanks, Marcy. We don't have a lot. Actually, we just got a question in as we're speaking. And so this is our only question. I'm also trying to speak slowly to give you a chance to have a drink of water.
Oh, thanks.
Take a breath.
I'll do that.
So we have actually now a second question coming through. So I'll start with the first one, Marcy. So this one's from Seth Cohen. So what do you see as the role of ECCR in helping with climate risk communication, that is across agencies with non-government stakeholders? Or do you see risk communication support as a subset of the challenges, skills, and solutions running through all of this?
Wow, that's a good question, Seth. You know, I'd like to hear your thoughts on that, but I think that in some situations, you know, risk communication is a facilitator or mediator has to understand the context in which a particular project is happening. What are the risks that the federal agencies are trying to communicate, and help the federal agencies figure out how best to communicate those sorry, I was distracted. That question came from Hal Cardwell at the Corps of Engineers. Okay. And help the federal agencies figure out how best to convey the risks in a way that people can understand. I think it's more often going to be the federal personnel or whichever agency is sponsoring an effort who will provide the expert who will do best at characterizing the risks, because it's a technical topic. But in planning an event, the facilitator or mediator can provide feedback to the presenter about, you know, if the way that they're putting something out is going to be understood in the way that they hope it will be. That would be the main thing I would say about that. But I wish we had more time so I could pull some of the rest of you in to help answer that question. Okay, what else do we have out there, Brian?
Yeah, so just one more question. And yeah, I do want to correct the record there. That was Hal Cardwell disguised as Seth Cohen. So we have another comment or another question from Jessica Western. And for anybody who didn't see it, if you look in your chat box, Jessica had posted a link to another resource along similar lines. So the question was, Marcy, just simply, did FACA come up at all in your interviews with federal personnel for the assessment.
That's interesting. I don't remember that it did. But yeah, I mean, I know personally that that there are federal initiatives that include FACA committees, and I'm going to mention an example of one in a few minutes that are helping to work on climate change challenges, and there's others that don't. So they didn't actually mention that it was a barrier or a key challenge.
Yeah, so certainly though, something to think about moving forward.
Yeah.
All right, Marcy, that's it for now. So I think we can go back to the material.
Okay, then let's move on, Courtney, and I hope that some of you will call me up and talk about some of the stuff in more detail and or download the report, because there's so much to talk about. The last thing that I want to share with you are 2 examples of projects that have successfully used collaboration in the environmental field to tackle things that policy challenges on the ground that are exacerbated by climate change. So there's 2. One, I mean, I am collecting lots of them, and I am going to figure out how to make them available to those of you who want more examples. But just for the time constraints for today, I'm going to highlight 2. One comes from the EPA and one comes from the Forest Service. And I chose these 2 because they're different scales and different kinds of climate change challenges. The first one has to do with rebuilding at the local and regional level after Hurricane Sandy in the Long Island area. And the second one from the Forest Service has to do with tackling the challenge of catastrophic wildfire, and that involves collaboration at both the national level and the landscape scale. And depending on the size of the landscape, it could be local or it could be regional. Next slide, please. Okay, so the first one coming from EPA in Region 2, it has to do with rebuilding after Hurricane Sandy, which hit in 2012, and it really whomped the New York area, especially coastal New Jersey and Long Island, for reasons exacerbated by climate change, warm Atlantic temperatures, for example. The Long Island area has a very dense population, 2.8 million on an island that takes maybe 2 to 3 hours to drive across. And it really, experienced 10-foot surge from the coast. It experienced trees down, power out for weeks. 100,000 homes were affected on Long Island alone. 7 deaths. I should say 7 deaths on Long Island alone, and storm-wide $8 billion in damages. Next slide, please. So the feds worked under FEMA's National Disaster Recovery Framework, which focuses on equitable redevelopment and building resilience, especially for under-resourced communities. The feds worked with state and local players. EPA and FEMA were the key federal agencies, and the state of New York, and then 2 counties, Nassau and Suffolk counties, one Democratic, one Republican, and then later the Nature Conservancy and the University of Long Island at Stony Brook joined the effort. They worked together, calling themselves the Long Island Smart Growth Resilience Partnership, for about a year and made no progress. The projects, some of the challenges were that the kinds of projects involved are long and complex, and it was a little daunting about where to start. The organizations and agencies had different institutional missions, limited resources, different priorities, technical challenges, political challenges, and trust between the counties. And then, of course, interpersonal differences. So they were stuck. After a year, they were stuck. Next slide, please. So EPA and FEMA teamed on bringing in an outside facilitator, Bennett Brooks from the Consensus Building Institute. And he undertook a 6-month assessment and convening process to refocus the participants on a tangible approach to achieve shared goals. And their shared goal really centered around drinking water quality. And he created a user-driven process. The idea was to bridge their silos and ensure that equity was considered in the meeting design. So the process launch, they used a workshop format called the workshop was called Accepting the Tide. It involved 100 Long Island stakeholders and refocused them on their shared goal about drinking water quality. They used a World Cafe format with workshop and panels. And the focus was on identifying possible projects to pursue. And several EPA facilitators assisted Bennett Brooks in pulling off a very successful workshop. And then the core negotiating group with the parties that I mentioned earlier picked up the ball from there to actually select projects and implement them. And Joe Siegel, who's the EPA Region 2 point of contact on this, said that facilitation really changed the dynamic. Next slide. What made it a success? Well, you see both substantive successes on the left and process successes on the right. I'm going to just highlight some of the substantive successes. They generated a health impact assessment that focused on the vulnerability of the aquifer to saltwater intrusion and cesspool discharge, and identified several possible code change options. They undertook an ecosystem services evaluation focusing on the benefits of wetland restoration as a buffer. They developed and provided training for local and regional leaders about community-driven scenario planning, and that included an environmental justice screening tool for resilience planning. And they developed a hazard assessment tool for local governance that looked at the effectiveness of current ordinances and how to improve them. On the right, you see some takeaways as far as process best practices. Due to time constraints, I'm not going to read those out, but as you can tell, I hope it was a fabulously successful process. Next slide. For further information, Joe Siegel at EPA Region 2 or Bennett Brooks at Consensus Building Institute. And we will share these slides with you, so you will have all this contact information and so on and so forth. Next slide, please. The other case study that I wanted to just highlight real quickly is from the Forest Service, and this one is national in scale. It's called the Collaborative Forest Landscape Restoration Program, or CFLRP. It was established by Congress in 2009. And as you may be aware, Americans value our forests and the services and benefits they provide, but that comes with a lot of conflict and litigation. And so the focus of this program is to get people working together on their own landscapes to restore forest and watershed health, reduce the risk of uncharacteristic wildfire. They put it that way because some wildfire is natural and helpful, but catastrophic levels not so much. And it's exacerbated by climate change. So the CFLRP is also intended to benefit rural economies. The fact that it was kickstarted by legislation was very helpful because it provided a framework to invest in collaboration and provided funding and stature and the mandate. Next slide, please. So what did it look like? Well, in the green box, you see the national level, the Forest Service Washington office chartered a FACA, a Federal Advisory Committee. And that committee helped develop the program and helped screen proposed projects that came up from the field level through the regional offices to the Washington office of the Forest Service, and they had to compete for funds, and they had to demonstrate that a collaborative approach was likely to succeed on their particular forest landscapes. Each of these projects, so the blue cloud looking things, are meant to stand in for a landscape scale project. So there are several in many of the regions. Most of the regions have one or more of these landscape scale collaborative forest restoration projects. Next slide, please. They differ, each of the projects differs because of their own locales, different issues, different circumstances, different source for a facilitator, whether it's from the private sector, a consultant, from a university or an NGO, but all have a focus on developing a shared vision, bringing science to bear on how to restore their forest, being inclusive of all the different affected parties, and developing shared ownership in what to do about restoring the forest, reducing catastrophic wildfire risk. But they did find that bringing science into the picture and facilitation were both key. Next slide, please. Oops, if you could back up one more. I forgot to tell you some of the benefits. So 24 projects have been funded to date. Each project gets 10 years of funding, which is really, really helpful. And in the first 10 years, 420 different organizations were involved. They accomplished ecosystem improvement on 5.7 million acres. 1,000 trail miles were improved. They attracted 470 million in partner contributions, generated 2 billion in local labor income, and an average of 5,440 jobs per year. They reduced the Forest Service's hazardous fuel load by 20% and decreased the severity of wildfires in these areas. Next slide. So Lindsay Buchanan is the contact for more information on this. And the idea is, I'm sharing models that might be replicable for you in your situation. These are powerful successes. And if you know of other successes that we should document, we would love to hear about them. We don't want to put, we don't want to impose work on you. So if you would like us to interview you and document your success story, I'd be happy to do that. Just give me a holler. Again, my contact information is at the end. Next slide. Questions or reflections at this time? Again, Brian, let's see if there's anything in the chat screen.
Yeah, Marcy, not seeing anything. If anybody has a quick question or something they want to add, please do put it in the chat or the Q&A. But not seeing anything, Marcy, perhaps we
move on.
close it out.
Okay, next slide, please, Courtney. Okay, we're moving into a wrap up. Next slide. So moving forward, I wanted you to know that the National Center for Environmental Conflict Resolution, our team has established a service area focusing on bringing ECCR to bear on climate challenges. We are happy to talk with you, free consultations, give us a call. If you would like to chat about a situation you're facing and get a little support, a little phone conversation. If you want an full-on situation assessment, we'll help you find a facilitator or a mediator, whether from our team or under contract from our network of facilitators and mediators. We are also fostering a community of practice for climate collaborators, other federal agency colleagues who are wanting to convene processes, folks at the state or local level, or tribal colleagues who want to kickstart a collaborative approach to working on a climate challenge they're experiencing. And as I said, we'd love to hear about and document your case studies for you. So just reach out and we'll get that going. Next slide. For more details, please download the full report. There's the website for you. And just in closing, I'd like to share with you a wonderful quote from oceanographer Dr. Sylvia Earles, who was NOAA's first female chief scientist. She said, she was quoted in Time magazine in November, "In the face of climate change, it would be easy to say, why bother? The problems are so big that there's nothing I can do. I might as well enjoy myself for the time I've got. But it's only hopeless when you give up. Change happens because of individuals who team up with others or inspire others." So that's my cheerleading cry for all of us. Let's dig in and make this work. And these tools hopefully will be of service to all of us in doing that. Brian, I think you would like to make a few comments and share with folks a little bit about the collaboration training that is available through the Udall Foundation. Over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Marcia. Next slide, Courtney. And yeah, so we'll wrap up here in maybe 2 minutes. If I just can have your attention for these last 120 seconds or so. So first, I just wanted to thank Marcy for this presentation and all the work that went into the assessment report. Marcy is our lead on our climate service area, so she's a good point of contact for all of that. And this slide, Marcy mentioned earlier, one of the ECCR strategies we talk about is collaborative capacity building. Here at the National Center, we have a training program We have several of our trainings available in the next couple months. Some of them are returning back to in-person. So, and those are going to be held in DC, at least for this round. So if you want to check those out, you can just go to our website at udall.gov to see those. But I would say beyond that, we've invited, and the intention of the report and what we were trying to do, not only with the report, but with these webinars, was really a call to action, not only for federal agencies, but to our ECCR practitioner colleagues out there. And those are, as Marcy mentioned, within the federal government, within different offices that might be placed within different agencies or personnel that are embedded throughout agencies. It also comes from ECCR practitioners in the private sector, comes from ECCR practitioners that have a home at a university or at a nonprofit. So there's lots of resources out there. This is not the only training program. There are training programs or trainings within agencies, trainings provided by the private sector. One thing is, as Marcy mentioned, and as her quote, the final quote sort of brought home, this is a massive challenge. And, it's not going to be solved by any one entity or any one person. We're all in this together. We're all going to be part of any solution that comes out of it. So, this is in part to bring everybody together around these issues. We're happy to serve in any way within that context, but there's lots of things out there, and we can help make those connections too. So with that, I just want to thank everybody for participating, for being here today. I want to thank Marcy and Courtney for their role in the webinar today. Hope this was helpful, and we will be sending you a link to the recording. We'll be putting this on our YouTube site. As Marcy mentioned, we will also send you a link to the report, but that's also available on our website. So with that, thank you. Have a great day. Have a great rest of your week. And we hope to see you back here or somewhere similar in the future. Goodbye.